I'm David Sterling, Chair of the Chief Executives Forum, and I'd like to welcome you all here today to PwC's premises. They're wonderful new premises where we're going to have a discussion this morning about the hybrid workplace and the transformation that we needed to help us to get there. Just before we start, I think Kevin McAllister, who is the senior partner here in Belfast, just wants to say a few words of welcome.
Thank you, David. And I'd say a very few words of welcome. It's great to see so many familiar faces in Merchant Square this morning for what will doubtless be a very interesting discussion about hybrid working and transformation. So thank you for coming along, and also very welcome to the people who are joining us on the live stream as well. So thanks for that. And I would also like to add my thanks to my two colleagues, Laura Hinton, who is our Chief People Officer, and Derek Tate, who heads our real estate operations and strategy team, both of whom are going to help us through the discussion this morning. So lovely to see you here, and I'm going to hand back to David.
Okay, thank you, Kevin, and certainly a really big thanks from us in Chief Executives Forum to PwC for affording us the opportunity to have this discussion this morning, and for indeed throwing open your doors to us. So thank you, Kevin. This is Chief Executives Forum's first hybrid event. So we have about 15 people in the room, and we have, I think, around about 80 people online. And certainly our desire is to move to more hybrid events in the future, because I think there's no doubt a lot of us have missed the sort of face-to-face interaction over the last 20 months. And hopefully we will have more events like this. We are recording the event, so there will be a record. And certainly for all of those of you who are our digital audience, we'd be very keen for you to use the Zoom chat function just to fire in any questions you may have, and hopefully we'll have a bit of a discussion at the end. But I want to start actually this morning with a discussion with Laura Hinton. Laura, you're very welcome. I think you've just come over this morning.
I have.
Laura is PwC UK's Chief People Officer, and a member of PwC's UK Executive Board, where she holds the position, as I say, of Chief People Officer, as well as being responsible for the firm's overall transformation programme. And I think, Laura, you also lead on PwC's external reputation and communication agenda. Laura is also a member of PwC's Global Human Capital Leadership Team and is an Executive Fellow at King's College Business School in London. So I'm hoping that, Laura, you'll be able to give us a sense of the journey that PwC has been on through the pandemic. And maybe you could just start by giving us a sense of how PwC decided on the most appropriate return to work model.
Yes, I certainly can do that. And it's great to be here. It's good to see everybody and everybody online as well. Yeah, and I think the word you use is exactly right. It's been a journey, and we are definitely still on that journey. Just to get my, I guess, caveats in early, I don't sit here with all of the answers. Arguably, I don't sit here with any of the answers, but really happy to share our experiences, what's worked and what hasn't. I think very early on in the pandemic, we took an approach, as I'm sure many organisations did, that it had to be a people-first approach. The well-being, health of our workforce, of our people, was the absolute key priority, and that, as a kind of a North Star, has served us very well, I think, and that's been very much about adult-to-adult conversations, explaining to people where we are, why we're making decisions, the process that we've been through, telling people what we know when we know it, even if we didn't have all of the answers. And certainly in those early months, there were a lot of answers that we didn't have, and as we looked into the future. So really, in developing our policy around opening offices, people returning back to offices, there was a lot of communication. We did a very detailed survey asking all of our people what they enjoyed about working from home, what they missed about being in the office, and the flip side, what was not so great about being at home, and what did they not enjoy about being in the office. Huge amounts of data. We've got 24,000 people across the UK firm. I think we had over 20,000 responses to the survey, so we had a lot of data to look at. We made sure we looked at it through various different lenses, regionally, by gender, by ethnicity, just different perspectives in terms of making sure we weren't missing anything around the kind of plan. But what was very helpful, we got some really consistent messages in terms of, people seeing real benefits to coming back into an office, but actually nobody said they wanted to come back full time, which isn't a surprise, is it? So I think that COVID, whilst clearly it's been really challenging, has definitely given us opportunities to think differently about the way that we all work, about our lifestyles, about our priorities. So I'm certainly hoping that we can hold on to all of the things that have been good and beneficial about a different way of working, but also get back to some sense of normality and all of the positive things that we know exist being into the office. So it was very much based on survey, based on data, based on focus groups and input from our people around how do you see the future? What do you want it to look like? Engaging with our business leaders as well in terms of, so what do we think from a business and a commercial perspective we think it needs to look like, and hoping that there would be some overlap in those answers. And the good news was that there was a lot of consistency in terms of what we thought would work from a commercial perspective and what our people said they wanted to do.
Okay. What, in a sense, was the problem you were trying to solve? How did you define the challenge, really?
I think so the reality is, I mean, obviously in that first lockdown in March last year, we had no choice but to work from home. That was, you know, how we all had to switch literally overnight, and we'd made some great investments in technology. So the physical transition to home working was actually pretty straightforward. So we really kind of had to think about how would that work longer term? What were the mental health challenges, particularly, were kind of up there as one of the problems we were trying to solve as we thought about how do we support people through the pandemic. But actually a lot of feedback around loneliness, around isolation and anxiety around the pandemic generally, anxiety about being at home and feeling isolated, but also anxiety about coming back into the office. So I think the whole process has been, you know, very much a balancing act of different priorities. There isn't one perfect answer for everybody, and we've been clear on that. There isn't a kind of one size fits all. It's been very much based on communication, openness, transparency, and finding an answer that works for most people most of the time, I would say.
Okay. You said you had a lot of data to draw on there. What type of information did you consider important to help you with addressing some of these challenges?
Yeah, so we had data around how often people wanted to come back to the office or client sites. Obviously, we have a lot of people working with our clients on their premises as well as being in an office, and gave people a choice in terms of, you know, what's your ideal scenario, everything being equal, and, you know, there'll never be an ideal world. But actually, the majority of our people told us they wanted to be back in an office environment, either 2 to 3 days a week or 3 to 4 days a week. So pretty much split. There was some split by age. Now in our world, you know, age tends to mean hierarchy and grade. So our partners and directors were more keen to come back than our more junior members of staff. We also, to that question around what do you value about being in an office, I think I was going to say I wasn't desperately surprised. I was a bit surprised that the number one reason that people gave us across the board, all grades, and by some margin for wanting to be back in an office was to socialise. We did have an option to collaborate on a work, you know, project-based perspective. No collaboration. It was purely socialising. They missed the human connectivity, the kind of the glue that brings people back together, the co-location so that they could go out after work. That was the number one reason. If we looked at our more junior cohorts, it was about training and development and coaching. You know, we're a big coaching organisation. We've recruited about 3,000 graduates and school leavers in the last 18, 20 months. So that's a lot of people as a first job. And they were definitely feeling the need for kind of in-person contact and kind of coaching and development. So lots of different data points, different, as I said, by grade, a bit by location. Those people in London, more anxious about coming into London and travelling, more because of public transport rather than any fear about being in a physical office. So many different elements to balance.
Okay. And we know that people have different work preferences. You know, some people get their energy from the team, some people get their energy from within. Were you able to assess the makeup of your workforce in that way?
Yeah, we didn't do any kind of personality profiling type people, but I guess more anecdotally. I mean, I'd have people say to me, Laura, I was born for lockdown. I love it. You know, I never have to interact any of that kind of social, you know, the forced smile, the, you know, being in a busy office. I mean, you can see here, we're kind of open plan, and that doesn't work. for everybody. So we have to recognise some people absolutely loved it. You've got people on the other end of the spectrum who literally couldn't wait to get back into an office and have been back 5 days a week since we opened the doors. But the vast majority of people are somewhere in between. They can see the benefit of being back in an office, but they also loved their time being at home. So I think it was points across the spectrum.
So you were conscious of the need to continue to develop your people, understanding that different people have different preferences and therefore would have a different attitude to the return to work.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is, which is that, is a great place to be. We are really effective and really productive from home. We know that when we all had to work from home, we actually did it pretty
So you would have
seamlessly.
metrics which show that your productivity has still been good.
Yes, so in our world, we have utilization, we have timesheets, the joy of people recording their time and how they're spending their time. And we saw productivity go up throughout lockdown. We saw engagement scores go up significantly, actually, as well. The flip side of that, there was definitely feedback around just a lack of boundaries. You kind of heard the phrase, it's not that I'm working from home, I'm sleeping at work. The fact that actually it was really hard to switch off. The laptop, many of our people, the average age of our workforce is 31. More than 50% of our workforce is under the age of 25. So the majority of people don't have lovely, offices at home with, dedicated space. It's a laptop on a bed in a shared flat in many occasions, and it just wasn't a particularly kind of conducive environment to work. So we were kind of taking into account all of those different elements in terms of what that future really needed to look like.
Okay. And obviously you're an organization that survives by supporting clients. And how did you balance the needs of your clients with the needs of your people? Were there any competing priorities that you found difficult to manage?
Interestingly, the majority of our clients, and actually I think this is one of the shifts that we probably will see more longer term, were very quick to say no external visitors. So actually where we would have been based on site for many of our projects, they were actually, we don't want you here. Now that has a lot of, I think, more sustainable benefits if we can keep it. We have lots of people traveling, lots of people flying, around the world. But if we can break that cycle with some of our clients around to believe that you're working hard enough, I have to see you physically in my office. I think we broke some of that mindset, and that was definitely a good thing. Having said that, we were very clear, we're a client service organization, and we have got some clients, we've got a lot of people that work in frontline services that have been on client site the entire way throughout the pandemic. So we've got back to that kind of points at every element on the spectrum, but clients generally in the main saying stay away, and we'll work with you in a different way. So that's very helpful from a broader talent perspective. But saying, where we have clients that are saying, I need a team here for good reason, they need to be physically located, we would ask our teams to do that. Now, it's getting quite interesting at the moment around some of our clients saying, well, I only want a fully vaccinated team. We've already had a handful of those requests at the moment, and we're dealing with them on an individual basis. But if that becomes more prevalent, that's going to be quite interesting. We're not gathering vaccination status, we're not gathering that data from our people.
Do you see that becoming a particular challenge then? There's sort of human rights dimensions to that. I'm just interested because a lot of our members would have front-facing dimensions to their organizations, and I could see this becoming an issue. Is there anything that you've learned so far that would be worth passing on?
We definitely worried about it a lot, I think, in the early stages in terms of what the requirements would be of an employer. Under the Health and Safety Act, you've got a requirement to, a duty of care for your workforce as a whole. And there was an interpretation of that to say, well, if somebody comes into your office who is not vaccinated, having been given the opportunity to be vaccinated, then your duty is to the wider workforce, and therefore you shouldn't allow them to come in. But actually, there have been quite a lot of kind of cases, and our employment lawyers have been very focused on it. We haven't seen that actually come to fruition in the UK. Our US firm definitely have. Obviously, it's a very different environment in the US. So our US firm are not allowing people into the office unless they have been double jabbed. But that is in line with the kind of norm in the US. There are certainly, as far as I'm aware, very, very few organisations, if any, who are following that rule in the UK. Care homes, it's a requirement. Some of the kind of frontline workers, it's a requirement. But not in kind of professional services or kind of a business office environment so far. So we're watching it very closely. And I think there's the kind of the legal employment law angle, and then there is the reassurance angle around how do we encourage people to come back into an office when they would be, they would feel happier to know that everybody around them had been double jabbed. So we're just working through that at the moment. So whilst obviously there are different restrictions in different parts of the UK, we are in England, some of our offices where we're not required to follow social distancing, we're still keeping some spaces where they'll be socially distanced. We're giving people lanyards who just to say, I'd like you to stay away, so that there are ways that people can communicate that they're more anxious, but still come in and get the benefits of being in an office. So I think that's one that's got a long way to run actually in terms of what it looks like. But at the moment, I think our fear that it would become very litigious, very kind of process rules focused around vaccinations hasn't happened.
Okay. So you said you were on a journey. Do you maybe want to say where you feel you are on that journey now? Maybe if you could share with us how many people are now coming back to work on a sort of, and on what basis, and what you see as the big challenges going forward.
Yeah, so we tried to provide as much clarity to our people as early in the process as we could. So we launched something called the New Deal, which was back in March actually, which was set out the kind of future of work. What do we think the new ways of working look like in a post-lockdown kind of post-vaccination kind of period, which we're pretty much in now. So that wasn't just about where you work, but it was around development, it was about recognition, it was about the quality of the work that people did. But there was a kind of a big focus on empowerment, so kind of how, when and where you work. So we have asked all of our people to think about, so on average spending half of their time in an office. We're saying between 40 and 60% of your time we would like you to be co-located with your colleagues. That could be on client site, it could be in an office, so roughly 2 to 3 days a week. Now that would be an average, and we're asking people to be very thoughtful around, well, what is it you're doing? I think there are some activities that work brilliantly from home. You wouldn't, if you're reviewing a report, you're into data and analysis, why would you spend time commuting into an office just to have your head down looking into a laptop only to travel home again? So those kind of activities, definitely do them at home. The more strategic, creative, innovative kind of team activities, obviously there's a huge benefit to being in the office. So it takes a bit of planning. So we're sort of saying to people, think about your average working week. Nobody's going to be measuring or counting how many days a week you're coming into the office, but that's roughly where we would like you to be. And we're pretty much there, I would say now. So Mondays and Fridays, our offices are a ghost town. But Tuesday, Wednesdays, Thursdays, we're about 70% of pre-COVID levels. So it's feeling busy. There's a kind of buzz around the office now. So that's feeling very, very positive. So on a busy day, so last week we had our record day. We had about 7,400 people in an office last Thursday across our 20 offices. And the maximum capacity across all of those offices is about 13,000, because we don't have space for everybody, because people are out and about and at clients a lot of the time. So roughly we're where we had hoped to be, but it's not evenly spaced over the week.
And is this proving to be a significant additional burden for team leaders having to manage in this way, or is this just something that is becoming part of the normal process of leading a team?
It's definitely becoming part of a process, but I wouldn't say we're there yet. I think a lot of our team leaders are worried about, well, what can I say? Can I ask somebody to come into an office? Can I organise a team meeting and expect people to be there? And we are, on the whole, if somebody clearly is vulnerable, is shielding, or is unwell, obviously they shouldn't be into an office. But for everybody else, we're saying that is the expectation that we want to work towards. But we will never, and we've said it very publicly, we'll never force somebody to come into an office that doesn't feel comfortable being there. So I think it's the human element that I think our team leaders are worrying about most, around what can I say and how do I say it, and it feels like an awkward conversation. So we are encouraging people just to think really practically, to book team meetings and have everybody, well, why don't we all as a smaller team come in next Tuesday, for example, So giving people a reason to come in, often attached to a social event or a learning or a training event, so that when people do come back to the office, that it's a really good experience. I think the onus is on the leaders and the team leaders and our partners to make it a great experience when people come back, because there will be anxiety, I think, the first time people return.
No, sure. And I'm interested, the people who said they found working from home liberating, and I'm thinking as well, if you said you've recruited around several thousand people since lockdown began, so there'll be people who are going to need to experience working in a team before. Has there been any need for any particular training and development effort in that regard?
Yeah, we've done some really basic stuff actually, but it's been, I think it's worked well. If you think, so 3,000 of our people have joined in the last 18 months as their first job. So not only have they not been into our office, they haven't been to any office probably ever, and many of them have been recruited in an entirely virtual way. And there are lots of things that, for those of us that are familiar with our offices, you don't even think about, as in, you know, how do I scan into the building? How do I book a room? Where do I go for lunch? Who do I sit next to? We have a hot desking process. All of those kind of practical logistics things can be really daunting. So we've done lots of videos of literally, this is the front door of our building, how you get in. We were temperature checking, which we're not doing anymore, but just all of the practical stuff of getting into a building, getting to the lifts. We did one of those for all of our main buildings, just to take away some of the anxiety. And discounted food. It sounds slightly frivolous, but you would not believe the impact of, so we've got 50% discount on all of our food in all of our canteens. People absolutely love it and come back to congregate over lunch, and there, you know, the coffee for 60p is a winner. So some of the kind of practical things to entice people back, but the really practical kind of buddying, logistics support has been particularly helpful, I think.
Yes, because I can remember before I retired in Stormont Castle, when we were in lockdown, and the first thing we lost was our catering facilities, which were quite small. And it was very significant, you know, because people then had to either bring something in or go out, and it was a frustration that you mightn't have thought about. I'm interested in the cultural side of things as well. Do you see the sort of PwC work culture changing as a result of this? And if so, is that something that you're managing or are you allowing to develop?
So I think that it's a fascinating question. So we are definitely focused on culture. And behavior, and a kind of a learning culture, development culture, quality culture. I think we recognize that for those of us that have been around a while, we're trading on old relationships, that if you only ever interact online, you know, they're not as good over time. So it's something about kind of re-energizing some of our kind of connections and face-to-face network. Again, being very honest, I do worry there's a generational element. And I will certainly have some of my younger teams saying, yeah, but Laura, I network online all the time. I date online. I live my life online. For me, this is normal.
Yeah.
You know, you're saying it's not as good, that I can't network unless I'm in the office, but I don't agree with you. Maybe they're right. I don't. So, but I think there's something back to the kind of the balance word of being, you know, in an open environment, just absorbing how people are interacting with their clients, with each other. There is something about our culture that I think, clearly I'm very biased, makes us different. It's our values, it's the glue that holds us together. If you're very effective and productive and doing your work at home, you may as well work for anybody. You could work for one of our competitors, it wouldn't be different. And I think, you know, we're all conscious of the war for talent, you know, the great resignation that we hear about all of the time. People are reassessing their lives, where they work, how they work, and what their real priorities are in life. I think without the glue, I think it's really hard to get loyalty. So the cultural elements are right at the center of our thinking.
There's a lateral thought here, which I won't pursue now, but certainly when you're looking at Northern Ireland, it's a great place to live, and we lose a lot of our young people who don't, you know, who leave at 18 or 21 and don't come back. if they could work for big companies in London but live here, you know, it would be a considerable economic benefit to us, but not pressure on that.
No, but I mean that whole area, and I won't go into huge detail on
Derek
that.
is one who got away. So.
Yeah, but the fact that many people have relocated, that, you know, they were living in this kind of small flats in London, Manchester, or wherever. They've let those leases go. They've relocated back to family, or they just live, you know, much further away from an office now. And the questions around, well, what happens to regional pay bands if people are working from home half their time? They get paid less than somebody else. The whole concept of think of pay, of benefits, of having a base location, the tax implications of that, being able to, because if somebody can work in Belfast for the London office, then they can work in Budapest, or they can work in Cape Town. Only they can't, because it's really complicated from a tax perspective. But there is an expectation from our people that we make that kind of model work. Not all of the time. And there's some of the things that we're looking at on the horizon around how do we genuinely offer something that's much more flexible. So some office time, but if you're not in the office, you can be literally anywhere. We're still working on that, but it's a question I get a lot. Okay,
a couple of questions. Siobhan Macaulay from the Housing Executive just would like to know what percentage of PwC staff are in front-facing roles?
About 80%.
Right.
Are client-facing, yeah.
It's quite high.
Yeah.
And from Elaine O'Neill in the Southeastern Health Trust, does PwC have any staff living outside of the UK, but, you know, working in the UK operation, and how does it work? I think we've maybe touched on that a little bit, but do you see that changing significantly with time?
Yeah, so we have sort of offshore service centres. So we've got lots of people who work in their kind of home location providing services to the UK firm, but they're more established structures. What we don't have at the moment, but I would actually love us to get there, is for real talent pools. We can recruit people to work for the UK firm, but they really could live in anywhere around the world. But it's really complicated from a tax perspective, so we haven't gone there. At the moment, we are recruiting in different talent pools globally, but for jobs where people will locate to the UK. But that kind of live and work anywhere, we're not quite there yet.
Okay. We have a wide range of members here, small organizations, large organizations. Many of them will be wrestling with the same type of issues that you have. For those that are maybe, you know, preparing an implementation roadmap, what advice would you pass on? What are the things that you learned that you think would be really valuable for others to pick up on?
Yeah, I mean, I think a few lessons. We definitely learned very early on that just opening the office doors and saying, you know, that's it, you can come back now, isn't enough. People don't. I think habits form very quickly, and actually a lot of people who even aren't necessarily loving the home working environment are just kind of set in their ways. Their diary is set up in that way, childcare is set up in that way. Are finding it hard to kind of make that transition. So I think there's certainly something about don't just assume it will happen. I think the onus is on leaders to make it a great experience when people do return to the office environment, and to be thoughtful. And we've certainly found we've had to be more precise and directive around what you should be in the office for and what you can be at home for. People want guidance and they want support. So we were sort of in the early days saying, well, the offices are open, come back if you want to, and work it out. But actually people have struggled to do that because, as I said, coming into an office that is empty and then there's no value being there, you're very unlikely to want to come back again in a hurry. Coming back to an office where your friends, your colleagues are there, there's value in the work that you're doing together, makes it a much better experience. And also, and again, this will sound like a frivolous comment, but one of the challenges, somewhat unbelievably, that we've had is people have, you know, back to set their lives up in a different way over the last 18 to 20 months, is puppies. So many people got dogs and puppies and haven't thought about who's going to look after them, which is genuinely, I must hear that 2 or 3 times a day in terms of, well, the reason I can't come back is I haven't got anyone to look after the dog. So that's the business to be in, I think. Puppy care, daycare, dog daycare. But again, it's the practical reasons that you just have to really think about to just make it as easy a transition as possible. It doesn't just happen.
Yes, these are the things that we all probably didn't anticipate and maybe couldn't have. But are there any other things that have surprised you that you know, would be worth learning from?
I think, I mean, we've touched upon it already, the kind of anxiety, not underestimating the anxiety of coming back for the first time. And whilst I think we are doing very well at percentages, but percentages and averages hide a lot of detail, don't they? We have still got it's a relatively small proportion, but people that haven't been back at all, where they're genuinely concerned, anxious to do that. So I think providing mental health support, we've done live streams with psychiatrists, we're providing that kind of it's perfectly normal to feel anxious, and these are some of the kind of hints and tips just to get people over the threshold for the first time. So nobody is being dragged kicking and screaming, but just encouraging people to come back for the first time. Our experience is definitely it makes it easier for them to return, but it's easy, we're easy to think everybody sees the world through the same eyes that we do, and reason to be relaxed about it, keen to get back to the office. People see the world so differently, and I think don't make assumptions.
Do you think there's a risk that with this new hybrid type arrangement, that the people who succeed are the people who are going to be visible and more comfortable, and that you might end up with a slightly different balance in your leadership teams in the future?
I think it's definitely a risk. It is definitely a risk, and we have to work really hard to mitigate it. So we look at all of our return to office data. I know, as you can imagine, we're a data-driven organisation. We love a bit of data, but through every lens you can imagine. Now, we're very careful with who sees the data around diversity statistics, but we do look at returners from gender, from ethnicity, by age and by region, to see if there are any anomalies coming through in the data. Nothing desperately worrying at the moment, but there are more men coming back than women,
right,
by 3 or 4%. But you kind of expand that over time. There is some, my concern is that front of mind, you get the opportunities, you get the, new pitch comes through the door. I can physically see you, are you seen as more hungry, more focused, more committed because you've come into the office? It's not there yet, but I worry about that. I worry about the kind of the ethnicity profile as well, getting some very small differences starting to creep in. So I think it's a real concern. I speak to clients pretty much daily around some of these challenges, and a lot of organisations are seeing much bigger discrepancies in terms of the proportions of people coming into an office, particularly gender. So it's definitely one to watch.
That would be one to watch, because we've all, I think, made so much progress on diversity and inclusion in recent years. It would be just a tragedy if things were set back. Going to need to move on shortly. Just sort of one sort of final question area. Working from home has now become quite a political issue. If you read the Sunday papers, there seem to be a number of politicians suggesting that businesses, organizations should be doing more to encourage people back into the office. Do you feel under any political pressure to get more people back to work or back into the office?
No, not really. I mean, I think we have been very vocal on the topic anyway. So I like to think we've kind of been leading within our sector, but leading on the approach that's right for us as a business, right for our people, right for our clients. So potentially that's just good luck that our approach and our strategy that is right for our business happens to align with where the government would like to go. But I think we are an apolitical organisation. We try to stay away from the political element, but we are certainly asked to comment a lot by government and other organisations around what we are doing, because we have been so vocal around the importance from a training development skills perspective of having people in the office for some of their time. So I think the messaging has aligned, but what's right for us won't be right for everybody, and I think that's the key message. It has to be right for the business and the particular workforce.
Okay, Laura, that's been a fantastic half hour. Some really good advice come forward there. If there was to be sort of one thing that you were to pass on as a tip, what would that be?
I think just to stay agile. I think people's minds change a lot. Again, we did a lot of surveying back in February. People were locked down. They were desperate to get out. Their views now are very different. So I think it's, even if you have data, you've got to refresh it regularly. The world is changing very, very quickly. Obviously, we're about to go into winter. Who knows what's on the horizon? So I think you can't just pick a course and stick to it. You've got to continually kind of change tack along the way, I think.
Okay, thank you. That's been really, really good. Very
Pleasure.
helpful.
Thank you.
Now delighted to introduce Derek Tate, Director with PwC UK. Derek leads operations in PwC's real estate advisory, covering the workplace, property services, facilities management, and digital technology. Derek has over 20 years experience on advising clients on developing and implementing strategies to manage buildings through the interaction of people, place, and technology. Derek's a graduate of Queen's University. He's one of ours, one who got away. He's a fellow of RICS and a certified member of the Institute of Workplace and Facilities Management, and is the author of the RICS Global Code of Practice for Procurement of Facilities Facility Management. Derek also told me before me, I'm in complete awe of him. He has done several marathons, and actually in the last year or so ran 100 miles, which I just think is just beyond belief. Anyway, the floor is yours, Derek. So you're very welcome.
Thank you, David. I haven't lived in Belfast since the mid-90s, but I've still kept my accent. I'm going to talk to you today about what we're seeing in our sort of wider client base. I mean, since the pandemic started, I've been talking to different companies, different organizations almost daily about what they're experiencing, what they're looking at doing with their workforces, with their real estate, with their technology, and what the issues they're dealing with. And as Laura has said as well, things have changed over the 18 months and are still changing rapidly. So I want to sort of just cover the context and what's been going, what we're advising, what we're seeing. And I just have to say, it's a real pleasure to speak to people in a room today, because I've been doing this sort of locked in room on my own for 2 years, just looking at a screen without having any sort of interaction with an audience. So it's fantastic to be back to doing some sort of face-to-face presenting again. And hopefully you can hear me okay. Ask the mic better now. So I just want to start to set the context a little bit. I mean, we've said it already, the world has changed. I think there's wide recognition that things are not going to go back to the way they were before. So some of the key points we're seeing, preferences are very personal. It's not the same for everyone. Different elements of the workforce and of customers of organizations as well want and see things differently. The hybrid way of working is here to stay. We're very, very few organizations are seriously talking about expecting things to go back to the way they used to be. There's an acceptance that some form of hybrid working will be here long term. There's a divergence of opinion, within sectors. I mean, I think we'll have seen various quotes about American banks, for example, have very much got a 5-day-a-week back in the office attitude. European banks are much more adopting hybrid working. So there's divergence in sectors. We're also seeing it within companies. We see chief executives tell us one thing, HRDs, finance directors tell us something different sometimes. So there is a lot of divergence. There's definitely a real opportunity to change, to transform, to move forward and make a great difference for the future. And employee expectations are very high. I mean, the war on talent is something that's got mentioned already. It's very real. People's expectations moving forward are very different and very high than what they used to be. Okay. There's just a few headlines up on the screens. There's not a day goes by really without something in the press about hybrid working, return to the office. I won't read through those, but I'll just touch. I think the last one on the bottom there, which I just saw last week, it's from an unattributed government source at the Conservative Party conference. Civil servants have been told to get off their pelotons and back to the office. And I think that just illustrates something that's starting to emerge now. There is a difficulty of getting people back. People are struggling to get people back, definitely. And there's also some resentment emerging, especially from people who've been actually back in the workplace all along, because they've had to be frontline workers versus those who aren't. I was speaking to the chief executive of an English city council last week. 60% of her workforce were always back at work. We're always providing services. And her workforce have accused her and her leadership team of spending the entire pandemic sitting at home baking bread. So, she's got a lot of work to do to rebuild relationships and move forward with this organization. We did a CEO survey earlier in the year. Again, I won't go through them all here. You can read them, but I really like the third one here, and I think it illustrates something that Mags and I were talking about earlier as well. There's been a lot of change compressed. It's 2.5 years worth of change has happened within 5 months period. These are trends and changes that were happening anyway, but the change has really been accelerated, and we've been moving rapidly forward. if I look at just the workplace and the office for a moment, I quite like this little model setting up some of the different sort of ages we've gone through as the workplace has evolved in the last 20 years. I can remember, I'm old enough to remember before 2000 when we maybe had a computer room and people could still smoke at work. But just before the pandemic, we were very much in this digital age. We were starting to embrace more digital work. We were starting to embrace more co-working and hoteling, some occasional working from home. The pandemic really forced us into this virtual age where we had most of us had no real choice but to adopt it. But the real point I want to make here is that as we're returning to the work now, we're not going back to the digital age. Things have moved on. The workplace has always evolved and changed, and it will continue to evolve. So we need to be planning now to go back to this personalized age where we consume work with personal preferences. And we need to be planning for the intelligent age where we use digital tools, artificial intelligence, etc., to help inform us how to be more productive, how to work more effectively. So we have to move forward and change and not go back. This is a little diagram here. It's a little sort of conceptual model of hybrid working that we spent a lot of time on, and I could recite it off by heart. But I think it's really helpful just to conceive this concept. At the absolute heart of hybrid work, we think has to be purpose and strategy. What are the objectives? What are the goals? What's the purpose? What are we trying to achieve? And that's surrounded by people, place, and technology, which are very integrated. Previously, we might have worked with a lot of clients and spoken to a lot of organizations about real estate issues, about technology issues, about people issues. Today, we're doing all three together. They're integrated. We can't think of them separately now. That's something that's changed. And around that, we've highlighted 6 areas there that are very linked and very important. Cybersecurity is a really important area, environment and social impact, the customer reporting, financial viability. These are really important areas that need to be considered, and all sorts of unintended consequences if we don't think about them and if we get them wrong. I thought this was just an interesting thing to show you how we're thinking about things differently now. If we were looking at a situation where we were thinking with a company about maybe having 4 days a week in the office and 1 day at home, traditionally we might have thought of the impact on productivity. We might have thought of how the staff are going to engage, what the impact on the well-being is, a more simplistic, linear sort of thought of a policy change. But that's changed now. Now we have to, if you think back to that conceptual model, we have to think of engagement, we have to think of well-being, we have to think of the space requirements, the real estate costs, the team cohesion, the wellness, the mental health, and actually break it down within teams. And this little model, which is an example from a client, just illustrates, productivity is up in 2 teams, but down in team 2. Yet engagement is up in team 1, but down in team 2 and team 3. So you can't predict how these things are going to work out so easily. It needs a lot of analysis, a lot of thought, and it's a lot more complex and interconnected than it used to be. Okay. I'll just put one other quote up here. I really like this one. It's from Naomi Cook, head of workplace at the Local Government Association. We need to move away from what I've heard referred to as the Martini approach to smart working. Anytime, any place, anywhere. If people remember that advert. And we need to consider what kind of workplace will truly represent business principles and deliver business goals. And I like that as a quote because it is going back to that center of that model before. It's about purpose. It's about strategy. It's not about how many desks do you need. It's not about if you use Teams or Zoom or which day of the week people can come into the office. It's about getting that workplace model right to meet the purpose and strategy objectives of the organization. Okay. I'm just going to put a few slides up now with some stats. I'm not going to read through them, but I'll just highlight a few key things. PwC have done various surveys. Many companies have. There's some common themes coming out. What we've really heard about people is that, people want different things, different age groups, different levels of seniority, different genders, perhaps. People are looking different things. There's no consistent theme of what people want, other than arguably a degree of flexibility. That's definitely something that we're seeing. I think the expectation quotes there are interesting. 33% would not accept a job that didn't offer some form of remote working. And nearly 3 in 10 would consider take a pay cut to have the option to work flexibly. I wouldn't have anticipated that. I think they're really interesting statistics. from a place point of view, I think Laura mentioned this earlier. You know, we need to change offices to suit their new purpose. It's a little cliche, but work has to be a place you want to come to, not somewhere you have to come to. I mean, for those of us in the room today, this is a wonderful workplace. Why wouldn't you want to come here? It's a lovely environment, but we really have to make the office a destination, somewhere people want to come to and enjoy that interaction with colleagues. You know, how do we make it a place to come to? What is its new purpose? We've got this little model here, the 6 C's. There's various versions of this. Many people have come up with something similar, but it's collaboration, community, concentration, creativity, coaching, commitment. If we think of the traditional office, it's all concentration. It's banks of desks, perhaps with some meeting rooms around the side. That's not what we need going forward. The little graph there is actually from a major telecommunications company who did a survey of what people wanted to come into the office for, and we've categorized it into these. By far the biggest is collaboration and community, which I think backs up PwC's statistics as well. People want to come in not to sit at a laptop and analyze a spreadsheet. They want to come in for this social interaction with colleagues. So we need to change that, and we need to reflect that in the space. We need less desks. We still need them. Some people will prefer to do concentrated work in the office. Some people will need to between other more collaborative activities. So we still need desks, but we'll need a lot more casual meeting places, a lot more sofas, a lot more armchairs, a lot more breakout areas. There's a bit of a buzz phrase at the moment, you know, hackable space, which arguably we're in at the moment, space that we can reconfigure and move around easily for different purposes, you know. Overall, most organizations will need less space. I mean, the average from surveys we've done is about 30% less space in terms of square footage, but 70% recognize the need to reconfigure space. So that space needs to be higher quality and different and more flexible. And we've adopted at PwC a living portfolio type approach, which others have as well, whereby it's rather than being refreshed perhaps every 7 years, once the capital has been depreciated, it's more of an ongoing living evolution, responding to change and what the data is telling us. Okay. From a technology point of view, I think Laura said it earlier, we went into the pandemic with really good technology in place. It was fairly seamless for us. I was quite surprised by how that wasn't for most of our clients. They didn't have collaborative cloud-based technologies in place. Many companies did not have laptops, hadn't given mobile phones to staff. So there was lots of temporary solutions put in place, lots of laptops and mobiles couriered to people's homes, lots of Zoom and Teams and things adopted quickly. Now is the time to put these in place more permanently, you know, work out the longer term solutions. And really importantly, consider the cyber risks. We know from a lot of conversations we've had and surveys we've done, cybersecurity is a real top concern of people. And if you think of more people working in different networks and perhaps not just at home, but perhaps in cafes or third spaces as well, that risk is greater. And there is a lot more targeting as well by cyber criminals. So that cybersecurity is a really, really important part of it. Okay. And you know, what does the sort of whole hybrid transformation look like as a process? What are our clients and companies and organizations we're talking to doing? I mean, there is no playbook, there is no case studies. You'd be surprised how often we get asked for case studies of where we've transformed an organization to hybrid working, but nobody has yet really, obviously, it's too early. Yeah? But what people need to do really is follow a process similar to what's outlined here. You need to have alignment. You need to understand what the objectives are, what the end goals are, have a vision. You need to assess what the needs are, you know, understand the needs of the workplace, understand the space you've got. You need to design and get approval for what you're going to change, and do the business cases, work out the detail of the changes to the HR policies, the different IT tools you're going to put in place, the bits of the real estate you may keep, the changes you'll make to the workplace. Then you need to actually implement these. You need to make that change, roll out the new policies, change the terms and conditions, you know, employ the workplace designers, the architects, negotiate out of leases you no longer need, you know, implement these new software tools. You need to actually do it. And then really importantly, I think you're not in an end position then. Things will continue to change as we move through the next year and beyond. So we need to keep evolving. We need to monitor what's happening. How are people using the workspace? How are people using the IT tools? How is people's behavior in terms of productivity, engagement, well-being, coming into the office, changing and evolving, and make those changes as we go through and we see data from that. And going back to the model again, we need to very much think of the levers we have from a people, place, and technology point of view, the various policies, the various changes we can make to real estate, and constraints we have with onerous leases and capital costs, etc., and the IT infrastructure and policies that are needed in place. And it's all rapidly changing. I mean, we see conversation topics come and go as we talk to people every week, and there's a few real hot topics at the moment. I think it's one we've talked about a lot already. Getting people back to the office is definitely a real hot topic at the moment. There is reluctance. How do we do it? How do we encourage people back? What are companies doing? Can you mandate vaccine comes up a lot. I think the short answer is no, unless you're in the USA, where you can and are. And I feel very sorry for HRDs of American companies I speak to are really struggling at the moment, because their bosses in the US are saying double vaccine to come back, and they're having to try and explain, well, we can't. It's not that simple. It's a bit more complicated than that. One thing we've seen some companies talk about recently is if you're off sick with COVID and you're not double vaccinated, well, we're only going to pay you statutory sick pay. I'm not sure if that's legal, but it's certainly something that's come up and is being discussed a lot at the moment as an option people can use. I think a carrot rather than a stick is perhaps a better way to try and encourage it. And as others have said, there's lots of little practical issues people are dealing with and working through at the moment. What do you do when someone has moved to Norfolk or Aberdeen or Portugal and is a bit more reluctant to come back? I mean, really complicated from a tax perspective. Many companies are permitting people to live away from the office, but some are saying, well, you have to be able to come in minimum 3 days a month. Others are saying you have to be able to come in at 24 hours notice. Many are saying, well, you know, we are going to look at pay and reward if you're moving further away, because it's not fair on others, you're paid the same. Lockdown puppies is definitely an issue. From my real estate perspective, we get asked a lot if people are allowing dogs in the office who didn't before, like Google often do. I mean, as a dog owner myself, I hope we consider that, but I suspect we won't.
That would be a no,
yeah.
Derek.
But I'm sure it's been on the agenda. Absolutely, as many are. But you know, these are the sort of issues that people are talking about and dealing with, and change management is a big issue as well. I mean, I've been personally surprised at the level of anxiety and fear there is for people to come back to the office, and not necessarily the people you might expect. So there really is a level of change and anxiety about coming back, and it's been a long time. It's been over 18 months for some people. So, you know, managing that change is really difficult for people, and that's a top thing. Other practical issues we're talking about a lot at the moment, masks. I mean, you know, do we still wear masks in the office? Many companies, including PwC in England, are still wearing masks in the lifts, for example, but not in other areas. But other people are choosing to. Do we maintain social distancing? Do we introduce social distancing zones, parts of the building where we do keep social distancing for those people who are perhaps more vulnerable or more anxious about interacting too much? Many companies, and I think we've just announced this as well, are introducing maybe coloured lanyards or badges, as in, you know what, I'm not so comfortable to shake hands, and I don't want that awkward moment where I refuse to. So just to signpost that, many organizations are either implementing or discussing introducing these things. Something I'm getting asked a lot at the moment is about how do we understand how the space is being used? How do we know people are coming back? And are they using the desks? Are they using the meeting rooms? And some ways of doing that are the hoteling type systems where people have to book to come into an office or book to come into a floor in advance. You can obviously get card access data usually as well to say when who's in and people are in. And then also a lot of the sensors under desks and in meeting rooms. So you can actually see how many desks have had someone sit at them for how many hours a day, how many people have actually been in that room for X percentage of time. So you can actually get a proper understanding of how the space is being used. And there are challenges with that. I was talking to a vice chancellor of a university a couple of weeks ago. If you think of some of the large lecture theatres like I used to sit at in Queen's, the sensors don't really work because the chairs flip up, and you can't use the ceiling-based sensors because the ceilings are so high. So there's a real technical challenge there as to how you actually measure the occupancy of some spaces. But this is something people are doing a lot at the moment, and then working out how they can actually analyze that data and use it to make decisions and move forward. You know, the other big topic is how we get people back in certain days. I mean, Laura mentioned our office is quite quiet on a Monday and a Friday. I mean, many people are experiencing this. But people want to, so you get a peak sort of Wednesday and Thursday. People want to flatten that peak because it's difficult to take advantage of the reduced real estate and get those savings. If you need to have the peak real estate for a Thursday 4 p.m., you can't really dispose of 30% of your space because where are people going to go? So organizations are looking at means and methods of trying to smooth that peak out so they can actually get out of some leases, reduce some space, and also have the office a bit more lively on a Monday and a Friday for the people who are in. So some people are mandating days for the whole organization. Some companies are mandating days for certain teams. Others are doing discounted food or free drinks or pizzas on a Friday afternoon, etc., just to encourage people to come in at other times. I think that the nudges, the guide rails is the way to do it rather than mandating it. And as these patterns get more established and people reestablish things like childcare and school drop-offs, etc., to meet this new pattern, you know, we can see that peak come down midweek, and organizations then can take advantage of the change. The other real hot topic at the moment, and actually I'm really pleased to see it working today, hybrid meetings. Proper true hybrid meetings like we're doing now are really difficult to get right. I don't know if anyone's struggled to do it yet, but they're hard. We know we can meet face-to-face effectively. We know we can do video calls effectively. But when half the people are on video and half the people are in the room, it's really, really difficult. And there's all sorts of productivity issues, diversity and inclusion issues. It's tough to get that right. So there's lots of new technologies coming out there now. Teams, Zoom, WebEx and others are developing new technologies. I know we're trialing some in one of our offices. So that, you know, as those become more established, they'll move on and we'll get there. And look, I think my time is just about up now. So thank you for listening to me waffle on about this. I could talk about it all day, and I think we'll get the opportunity to later with some of you. But I think the key point I would make is, you know, you need to have a strategy. You need to look at people, place, and technology integrated together, and you need to keep looking at the data, keep asking the questions, and keep evolving your solution as things change. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Derek. That was really, really impressive. I think we've all got the message that we're all in the business of optimizing the interaction of people, place, and technology. And I think you've given us some wonderful advice there. I'm going to turn now to Mags Miller, who's project manager for Agile Working in the NI Civil Service. Mags has been employed with the Strategic Investment Board for over 8 years, both as a strategic advisor specializing in change management and process improvement, and as a project manager on the Reform of Property Management Programme. So Mags is a very able understudy for Derek, who is got COVID, I think, at the moment.
He has, yeah.
So we wish Derek well, but Mags, over to you.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks for having me today. So I've been leading on the new ways of working in the civil service, and I've been working in this area from way before the pandemic. So for about 7 years now. And I remember prior to COVID, struggling to get 200 people to do a bit of a trial of hybrid working in the civil service. And then bang, overnight, thousands of civil servants lifted their laptops and went home and were able to do it. And in the weeks that followed, thousands more got laptops and also started to do it. So suddenly all of these people who had been telling me for years, this won't work. We need to be in an office surrounded by our very comforting stacks of paper. You know, this will never work. They have been proved wrong. It has worked. And there have been a lot of things that have been really successful about it. So in taking it forward, we did lots of things similar to what Derek and Laura have talked about. We surveyed our staff, And over 90% of them came back and said, we want to work in a hybrid way. We don't want to go back to how it was before. We had about 2% that said they wanted to work in the office all the time. So that's a very small percentage. And about a quarter said that they'd like to work from home all the time. So obviously we had to do something about it. We had to respond to that. And it was something that we'd been pushing for years anyway. So the first thing that we did was develop a policy around it. So we do have a hybrid working policy now. And as you know, the civil service is a unionised environment. And, you know, it's been quite a journey to get that one that everybody agreed to and that all 9 departments are bought into. So we now have that and we'll be rolling that out in the new year. In terms of learns, as I say, we did get all the departments together. So I lead a group with representatives from all 9 on it. And we did a number of workshop sessions with them to start off with. And we got them to think about what went well during the pandemic, what didn't go so well. And out of those good practices that you implemented, what do you really want to keep and hang on to and magnify that going forward? So a bit like what Derek was saying, we thought about this in terms of 3 strands. So people, tech, and accommodation. And actually we added a 4th, which is communications. But on the people side, what we really found was people like it and want to do it, but it doesn't work for everybody. So there is a small proportion that want to be in the office, and that can be, you know, as alluded to, for all sorts of reasons. It might be for personal reasons. It might be they don't have a suitable space at home. They may feel safer in work than what they do at home. So, you know, we have a big population with nearly 24,000 people, and obviously these problems exist. Mental health is a big issue, and we did have some people saying this is too isolating. I need to get back into the office for some social contact. Everybody said when we asked them, what did you miss? It was that social contact. It was the human interaction. So lots of people doing really innovative things for social interaction online, like having quizzes and bingo and coffee mornings and all sorts of things, but saying it's still not a substitute for that face-to-face. It's still not the same as seeing my colleagues directly. Other things that we learned about on the people side, it really is about getting the balance right. And approximately 25% of the civil service have been in the office throughout the pandemic. So we had about a quarter of our staff who are public facing that had to come in to deliver essential services. So, you know, Derek talked a bit about the resentment that's built up, and I think there is a little bit of that creeping in. So people feeling, you know, oh, because of my role, I can't avail of this flexibility whenever other colleagues can. So I think moving forward, that's something we really need to look at, and how we incentivize those roles. Because obviously going forward, there are roles that can only be performed in the workplace that we have. On the tech side, we did have lots of people with laptops, not enough at the start of the pandemic. So that has increased substantially. I think people have had to really, they were thrown in at the deep end in terms of learning how to use that technology. So whilst everybody's very comfortable to shop online and to use social media outside of work, not as comfortable with using some of the products that we had in work. And we had a range of products as well, which was confusing for people. So lots of departments were using lots of different things. So we've concentrated a lot on not just standardizing the IT kit, but also now looking at what products are we actually going to endorse moving forward, and what are we going to move to that suits our needs best. On accommodation, really, I think Derek summed it up very well for me there. We are moving away from rooms full of banks of desks. People just don't want that anymore. Generally, if somebody wants to sit on their own, they'll do that at home. And that's pretty evident. So people want to come in to collaborate. They want to come in to do project work. They want to bounce ideas off colleagues. They maybe want to come in if they're new staff to get mentored by another member of staff. So what does our offices look like moving forward, and how do we provide that accommodation? I think getting people back will be a big challenge. And unfortunately, a lot of our people won't be coming back to an environment like this that we're sitting in today. We've got huge variation in our accommodation. So some of it very, very good, and some of it very, very poor. And how do we get the standard of that up quickly? And all the usual budgetary constraints that we have. It's all going to be tight for money going forward. In terms of comms, I think the biggest thing that we learned was you can't do enough of it. And some of the things around communications have really surprised me during the pandemic. And we often get criticized for not being joined up enough. You know, one department doesn't know what the other's doing, this sort of thing. And I think a lot of people have found it easier to reach out during the COVID period, because you didn't have to set up that face-to-face meeting and turn up and make an effort. It was very easy to ping somebody an email and to touch base and maybe have an online chat with them. So that's something I feel has actually improved for us during COVID. And certainly I've seen that in the group that I have with all the 9 departments coming together. We have shared so many materials, learns, opinions. It's been really, really valuable. And I'd like to see that continuing as we go forward. So what have we done to date, and where are we on the journey? I think we're similar to PwC. So our policy, tick, we've done that. We've equipped our staff, tick. We have given them equipment to use at home, so chairs, they can get a desk if they want it. We've made it clear how they can claim for additional phone calls, all that sort of thing. So tick, we've done that. I think where we really are now is we need to embed what is a true hybrid model. And I don't think we've seen it yet. So we've went from predominantly office-based to being forced to work from home, because that was the message, work from home if you can. So people have worked from home in what, let's face it, hasn't been normal circumstances. You know, they've been looking after children, they've been caring for elderly relatives, they've, you know, had worries about their own health, all these sorts of things. It hasn't been a normal environment. And I don't think it'll really settle, and we'll see what the true level is and the right level until we get into a more normalized phase of the pandemic. So that's really what we're trying to plan for now. I think, like the others here, we do have people with very genuine concerns about coming back. Civil service is quite an old workforce. Our average age is about 47, 48. So, you know, getting near that magic 50 mark that, you know, are potentially at greater risk from these things. And people now concerned about colds and flus and the severity of those coming back. So I think those concerns are very real, and we need to cope with that. We are pushing asymptomatic testing to try and give our staff some assurance. So we're going to make that widely available and have collection points for kits in the estate. So hopefully that will provide some assurance. So really that's our challenge for ahead, is how do we get people back, and how do we do it in a controlled way? We don't want a mass flood back to the office. So we have asked all the departments now, and we're well on the road to this, to think about what is your business model now going forward. So a lot of people will have maybe stopped doing so much face-to-face services during that, and want to strike a balance with that moving forward. So we've asked them to think about what is your business model and what do you actually need to happen in the office. So we've got a lot of messaging to do around this. I would say prior to COVID, we did have a presenteeism culture where if managers couldn't see people in front of them, they didn't necessarily think that they were doing anything. I think that has moved substantially during COVID, and it has built a lot of the trust between managers and staff. So I think managers have been pleasantly surprised about productivity. I think as well, one of the other benefits that we've had in the civil service is that during COVID, a lot of people are saying that for the first time, I've been really clear about what my objectives and deliverables have been. Now, that should have been the way it was before, but actually being distant and having to communicate on a virtual level has made managers be more specific about what people were delivering. And I think that's a real benefit that we'll try to hang on to. So that's where we are. We're really at the stage now of rolling out our policy, which will be in the new year, trying to embed that and to foster good relations around it. We've got good relations with our trade unions on it. For the first time, I think they have come together and done joint communications with us, which has been really, really positive. And I think that's made a big difference to the staff. So that's really where we are. I hope that was helpful. Just one thing that I'll mention, we are also setting up, you might have seen it in the press, some regional hubs. So we are imagining that going forward, people have said they would like an office to drop into, even if they're working from home. So we have 10 of those planned over the next couple of years. We'll have 4 up and ready to go by the end of this financial year. We actually have 2 ready at the minute, and as soon as the restrictions lift, we'll be able to open those. But they have a mix of spaces in them, so meeting space, concentrated space. We've given them really good IT equipment, so big 34-inch monitors you can split into 6 panes and all this sort of thing. So printing facilities. So we're hoping that they sort of bridge the gap between home and work as well. But obviously we'll have to monitor the utilisation and see how that goes. So I think it is interesting times. Definitely our estate is too big. We knew that before COVID. We knew it was 30% too big before COVID. Now it'll be in excess of 50% too big. So we definitely have a right sizing exercise to do. But look, we'll look at that as an opportunity. It's an opportunity for us to get rid of poor accommodation and to focus on the better buildings that we have. And obviously there's potential savings there that we can plow into buildings as we go forward. So that's it, folks. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mags, and thanks to all 3 for your contributions this morning. Plenty to think about there. We've got a good selection of questions from our online audience, but certainly the people in the room might want to think up some questions as well. Just to start, it's quite clear, I think, from what both Derek and Mags have said, that there's a responsibility on organizations to make sure that the physical environment is right for the staff. But that extends as well, to an extent, from what both of you have been saying, into the physical environment in people's homes as well. And Derek, from a PwC point of view, how far does this go? It clearly needs to go further than just providing a phone and a laptop. To what extent do you need to make sure that the home environment is ergonomically fit for people to work in?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's 2 different ways of answering this. There's the legal perspective in terms of employment law, health and safety law, etc., and there's more the ethical perspective, what you should do. I'm not an expert in the legal perspective, but I think it's fairly minimal, like workplace assessments, etc., to make sure people have a space that's safe. But actually, I think the workplace is effectively spread into the home. So I think you need to provide some equipment, but also you need to provide some services. And there are discussions about this, and the market is responding. So the companies that provide services to buildings are starting to provide services to employees in people's homes as well. So I'm sure many of us have done the little sort of online workplace assessments where we answer questions about our posture, etc., and if we've got a good chair. And I'm sure many of us, you know, have been provided with chairs and laptops or other screens, etc. But where do you draw the line? I mean, do you go as far as doing electrical safety tests of people's home wiring? Do you pay people an allowance because of the extra heating costs during winter? You know, if I have a chair from my employer, is there a mechanism to fix it if it's broken, or to take it away when I don't need it anymore? These are all things that nobody's really got right yet, but they're definitely thinking about it. And I do think we need to provide these services more to the home ongoing, and we need to have models and mechanisms to do them. And we're definitely seeing the market to start to offer and provide these.
Okay, and Mags, I presume these are things that the Northern Ireland Civil Service is looking at as well?
Yes, absolutely. Actually, throughout the COVID period, we have gradually increased this. So our DSA assessments and our health and safety assessments are all online now. So we've made all of those available online. We've got a system in that will give us stats on that. So it shows us how many are completed, how many issues arise, all that sort of thing. So we've got management data there that we didn't have before. In terms of equipment, we do provide chairs. So that's standard. Anybody can ask for a chair if they want one. We've had to arrange, obviously, delivery of those to people's homes. So we've added that on. We have added also to our furniture contract, smaller desks, because the standard work desk is far too large for most people's home environment. So we've added a selection of smaller furniture there now as well.
Okay, and just looking at the softer side, Laura, the preparing staff to come back to work, did you give specific training to managers to enable them to have those conversations? Is this something you invested in?
Yes, we did. So we've got a well, it's called a return to office microsite now. It was the COVID-19 microsite. So lots of hints and tips in terms of having the conversations, lots of kind of guides. And so yeah, that we've not done any face-to-face training, but actually there's a huge amount of information and tools, videos available to people to enable them to do that. I mean, and just to add to that, the conversation about office equipment, that was a big for many months. So most people have got a very good setup at home now. We're now finding the opposite. People are better set up at home than they are in the office. So most people have got a double screen at home now, and actually coming back, they don't. So it's interesting kind of people's expectations are going to change.
Okay, just any questions from the audience here? Tracy.
Yeah, thank you for that. That was very helpful indeed. Oops. It kind of when you went through it, I was saying, yeah, yep, okay, yep. I'm Department for Communities, and on day one, we only had less than 10% of our staff the ability to work remotely, and our benefits requirements doubled overnight. So it's been a little bit of a journey, to say the least. I think just the issue of engagement is an interesting one, because you talk about purpose and strategy. Our staff really knew what they were about during COVID, and we saw a level of engagement we've never seen before. We have some of the most junior staff in the civil service working in some of the most difficult jobs. And I tell you that it's when you speak to them, like they're not shrinking pilots. And all of a sudden they saw themselves for what they were, which was key workers and heroes. We had a massive jump in our engagement score during that period in terms of them really saying what they were doing on the ground. And the big challenge for us will be to retain that level of engagement. And I think there's a massive issue here about retention actually for young people. And I don't think that's just for the civil service. I think this new environment we're working in, I'm seeing it already. You could be based here and working for Whitehall as opposed to the NICS or anything else. And I actually think you talked about dogs, funnily enough, but some of the new inward investors, I've been around their offices. They're actually allowing, they have dogs in the office. So if you don't let people bring dogs in the office, they'll go and work for somebody else. But I think this issue of retention is the question. You know, how in this new environment, which is about choice and personalization, how do we actually manage this whole issue of retention? I think that there'll be people who, for example, have been so long in the jobs, they'll probably not think about moving, but, you know, we're recruiting a lot at the moment. And I do think that the issue of people, you know, they're not going to be in for jobs for life now. And what we all have to think about is actually, how do we create an environment that people feel they want to work? I think purpose is going to be key. I think that's our golden bullet, by the way, in the civil service. It's actually getting people really, really connected to the purpose of what they're there for. I just would interested in your perspective on that, how we go forward, how we retain that level of engagement and retention.
For me?
Laura, do you want to pick that up?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with you. Purpose has got to be the kind of the foundation stone in terms of, and I think we've all had the opportunity to demonstrate our purpose over the last, you know, 18 months and really bring it to life. I think what we've certainly learned is that, you know, and we very much focused on our purpose, bringing it to life, doing the right thing for our people, investing in them, no furlough, no redundancies. People's memories are pretty short. So actually, that whilst they very much appreciated all of that investment at the time, the war for talent, we've all said it, is absolutely you know, at kind of critical levels at the moment. There are, you know, in terms of compensation offers being made that we couldn't match or would choose not to. So I think it's a really interesting environment, but and we've done a lot of investment for our people. What would make you stay? And funnily enough, okay, there's a bit about reward, but it's about somebody taking an interest and having a conversation. Is there another opportunity within this organization that I could do? So my team might not want me to move because they like me doing what I'm doing now, but actually there's so much opportunity within our world, as I'm sure there is within the civil service. Being able to, if we can fix the mobility within the firm, make it better than it is now, I think that's our big opportunity. It's about opportunity, it's about growth, it's about development, and it's about somebody that cares, believing your line manager actually wants to engage with you as an individual and work out what would make a difference to you, rather than a kind of central policy of this is, you know, this is the silver bullet, because I don't think that exists, subject to, you know, that the purpose and what you stand for as an organization is an absolute given at the moment.
So you would see that there is maybe going to be a need to incentivize people to behave in different ways. I'm not necessarily just talking about cash here, but making the quality of work better, more reflective of what people are looking for in terms of their own fulfillment.
Yeah, I think it is about, it is the coaching. A lot of this kind of is the face-to-face type activity, but it's personalizing everybody's employment deal in a sense. And that sounds a little bit grand, but it's the small gestures that make the biggest difference. So it's about having the conversation. So part of that is the line manager training point that we talked about before, giving people the skills and the time and the headspace to have the conversations around what actually makes a difference to you as an individual, and investing in that. There's a lot about upskilling and training, particularly in a digital world. So it's more of those elements than I think mass kind of pay rises for everybody, because the whole world is just competing with, I mean, literally the world at the moment around kind of the talent market.
Okay, we've time for just, I think, one more question, and I'll put this to you, Derek. But clearly, the other big challenge we're facing now is climate change, and there are opportunities here. Are you finding that your clients are actually taking account of the climate benefit that can arise with people working from home and traveling less?
Absolutely, but just to say, it's not necessarily a benefit. It's a challenge, but it's very high on the agenda. We often use the term ESG, environment, social governance, but it's very high on the agenda. And I think that the change we're going through now is a real opportunity to improve things. One of the thoughts I have on it is that, you know, I think most organizations expect to have less travel, less flights, etc. So the space, the real estate almost becomes a bigger lever, a more important issue to deal with to improve your sustainability. So how to get that right is really challenging. I mean, the obvious way is to have less of it. So, you know, the less space you occupy, the lower your carbon footprint is going to be, the less energy you're using. But the challenge of this, and this is why I say it's not all benefits, to do that, you're pushing this carbon consumption out to people's homes. And I don't know about you, but my boiler's probably not as efficient as PwC's state-of-the-art environmental boilers, you know. So you don't currently have to report on home workers' carbon footprints, etc. But ethically and morally, you probably should take it into consideration, and legislation may change in future, forcing you to measure it, which in itself is really difficult, because if we think of during lockdowns, I'm working from home, my wife working from home, my 2 kids are homeschooling. How do you work out what the carbon footprint for my job is? It's really challenging, but it's difficult to do, but it's definitely very, very high on the agenda and is seen as really the opportunity now. I think in 1-2 years' time, this will be what we're talking about, rather than getting people back in the office and hybrid working. It will be how we move this forward. Okay,
thank you. Well, look, we've run out of time. I hope you all agree with me. I thought it was a fantastic session. I think I want to thank Laura, Mags and Derek for their contribution this morning, which has been stimulating, certainly lots of things for us to reflect on and indeed act upon. We have a number of questions we haven't been able to answer, but we'll try and get answers for you and feed those back. So I'd like to thank all those who've attended in person here this morning, but also thank all those who've attended digitally. My final word would just be, again, huge thanks to PwC for facilitating this event and for allowing us to see what I would regard as state-of-the-art accommodation here, something we would all aspire to. So thanks everybody, and have a good day. Thank you.